What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. Not much to do catch-up-wise this week in regard to house cleaning. Today we're going to follow up on something, but we'll get there. So what we do have to talk about is the G1 expanding thing one more time. People seem to get it for the most part now, what I'm trying to say. But let me just give you one last example. I think it's much more likely that we'll see Legends class figures of the main cast, like we're getting with 3 or 4 different companies, than we will see the more obscure Masterpiece figures. And once the Legends are done, I think it's much more likely that you'll see a different class of figure with the G1 representation of the main core cast more than you'll see the obscure figures. So I think it'll just keep changing in that regard. And the response to the video kind of, suggests that as well, to be honest. One other thing, I had to apologize for episode 201 of Nerd Rage this week. For whatever reason, my laptop decided it was going to record off the internal mic and speaker rather than the mixer. As a result, it doesn't sound great. It's listenable, but it's not up to the normal standard of quality that we kind of try to keep at a minimum, I guess, with Nerd Rage. So I apologize for that. It'll be sorted by next week. That's my bad. That's on me. And one last thing in regard to Skull Wars. Most people got it. Most people were supportive. That's cool. It's good to see. We're going to get into a lot of stuff. We're going to get into some dangerous stuff in that regard. But some people didn't seem to realize everything stays the same. Here, it's just more, and the more is going to be Star Wars. The output is going to increase here, but the output won't be Transformers related. The Transformers related output here won't change. It'll be the same. And I got a big piece to look at this coming week. And what do I mean by big? Big. Now, let's continue. So I often get messages saying that I should update my Who's Who and third-party videos. I did a part 1 and part 2. They're actually the precursors to Sit Down Saturday. It's one of the beginning videos that started this kind of thing. And it's funny because in my head I ought to have been like, man, I think it's pretty conclusive. But I looked at them recently and I was like, nope, there's tons I'm missing here. So I figured we'd do a part 3, and there's probably enough to do a part 4 if you guys want to see that as well, kind of back to back. If you'd rather me space them out a good bit, I'm good with that too. So, awful lot to talk about. Don't want to waste too much time. Who's Who and Third Party, part 3. Let's go.
And we're going to start with Zeta. And Zeta's origins are pretty much cloaked in controversy. They were the designers of Toy World. They didn't feel as though they were paid appropriately, if at all, and they kind of embarked on their own with their designs that they had initially planned on having Toy World produce. Aside from that, given their reputation of constructor, they put themselves in an upper echelon almost immediately. And they released, to this day, pretty much one type of figure, which is figures that Toy World had either produced or figures that Toy World teased they were going to produce. So their claim to fame is really these ultra sturdy combiners, and their contribution heavily relies on that of parts forming and what that introduced to the game in regard to combiners. All of a sudden the proportions were fixed. All of a sudden the stability was fixed. Pretty much overnight. Now they've also gone out of their way to produce Masterpiece scaled figures that don't combine of Toy World designs that I'm guessing were theirs to begin with, that they don't feel as though they were compensated for. RC and Jazz, all with different paint applications, and they spare no expense when it comes to the paint on these, but somehow with their combiner stuff they don't add a whole lot to it. Their materials aren't great by any stretch of the imagination. What they bring to the table is stability and engineering for the combined mode of these figures. I've made no qualms about my fandom in regard to Zeta. I think they're doing a smashing job and hope that they continue. However, it wouldn't hurt my feelings any if they stepped up their materials and stepped up their paint application. The next company that we need to discuss that we haven't in the past is Planet X. Planet X is a very consistent company, and for the most part, they've released figures with a decent amount of paint, a decent amount of articulation, and a great amount of sculpt work. And for the most part, pretty fluid and fun and solid engineering. What sets Planet X apart, in my opinion, is that they stayed in their lane. They found a lane early on, and they're just going to ride it till the wheels fall off. Which, due to them slowing down an awful lot recently, may be a lot sooner than later. At least seemingly so. But what they've basically done are War for Cybertron, Fall of Cybertron figures. And some have been better than others, don't get me wrong. And they haven't all been home runs. But they've all been base hits at the very least. I'm not sure if they've ever released a figure that was just utter trash. So if you like that aesthetic and you like that scale, it's not a company that's really gonna let you down. They've pretty much gone without any competition, bar a few exceptions, stayed in their lane and stayed committed. And to be fair, have set a standard in regard to consistency, both in the line that they have committed to and in the quality in which they produce. Next is G Creations. I'm not sure they're even in business anymore, to be honest with you. They started off with a Dinobot combiner that was kind of a chug scaled thing. I think they impressed people with their material and build, along with sculpt and deco. But where they kind of fell short was with their engineering, and that's kind of remained consistent. To this day, they have one of the most frustrating pieces I've ever transformed in my life. And that is when they began their kind of second venture after their Dinobot combiner, which they referred to as their swan song. I'm guessing because of lower sales, but I guess did well enough to bring them to their second venture, which was masterpiece scaled IDW aesthetics of the Transformers line. And I think we only got 3. They're Prowl, Six Shot, and Prime. Once again, though, I think they set a standard with extremely high sculpt work, extremely high-end paint, and wonderful builds. It was just the engineering that kind of consistently got in the way. Add that on top of the stylized aesthetic that is a very niche thing within a niche thing, and I'm not sure the sales supported the endeavor. But time will tell, I suppose. They had teased many more, but I'm not sure they'll ever come to light. The good news is, though, they made a good product. Frustrating engineering, but a very solid product. Next up is Fans Hobby, who have made quite the name for themselves as of late. Now, this comes from the kind of make toys conglomerate. Fans Project comes from this place. Open and Play come from this place. Moss Toys came from this place. Fans Hobby now comes from this place. And from my understanding, and I don't know this to be fact, but they were Fans Project designers, that much is true, and they kind of embarked out on their own because they wanted to kind of do their own thing. And their own thing they did, with pretty much masterpiece scaled characters from the G1 continuation in Japanese continuity, which is a road less traveled, and I commend them for that. Their product is solid built, they utilize a lot of tampo paint, and the engineering for the most part is very professional. My criticisms of them is that the material doesn't feel like a masterpiece. It still feels like a chug. And stylistically, they may go too far left of center depending on their designs. I feel like their Overlord is a lot closer to the mark, for instance, than their monster bots. But the one thing I applaud about them is their willingness to take a risk. And they took a risk with obscure characters and relied on reputation from previous endeavors, along with establishing a new solid foundation. And as a result, I think they have been fairly successful. But that's really their lane. Masterpiece scaled, and in my opinion, chug built, obscure G1 characters from the Japanese continuity. Now, once again, speaking more so in generalities than specifics. Now, I won't be covering these in any great detail because honestly, I just don't know enough about them. But one of the things that's kind of become a thing, for lack of a better term, in recent years are KO companies establishing themselves in the KO market and then producing original molds for third-party products. We've seen this with Mech Fans Toys, Papa Toys, Wei Zhang, and the word is TF Element, which came from Black Mamba. Now, the only one of these that I can really attest to is the TF Element, and that was a very impressive piece. But it has been a phenomenon as of late. KO companies, I would imagine, getting finances under their feet with KO product to then go and produce third-party figures. That's been a kind of cultural change that we've seen. And I like the idea of these companies moving on to create original product. And by the way, fourth party is not a thing. That's just a fancy way to say KO. And lastly, for today, we're going to talk about Iron Factory, which, as you guys know, is one of my favorite third-party companies. And as I just recently stated, they're the best toys that I don't buy. But they started off with legend scale figures that were all kind of meant to be accessories in a playset fashion for the Titan class figures that Hasbro was producing, namely Metroplex at the time. They relied on smaller figures that coincided with the aesthetic of Metroplex, simultaneously having a high play pattern function to integrate with the playsets. Rapidly they began to evolve though, and it was around the time they did their Phase 6ers that they really established themselves in a new scale, slowly, but I think that was about the time it started changing, with slightly larger figures based highly off of the IDW IDW representations. And since then, they've definitely carved out their own niche and reputation that's built upon outstanding sculpts, engineering, build, and accessories for Legends class figures. They are, in my opinion, the best company making Legends class figures. The one problem they tend to have is that of tolerance, and I think oftentimes that's a result of the paint that they add. But as you guys well know, that's more than enough of a sacrifice I'm willing to make. I don't think there's a better looking Legends class figure on the market, point blank, period. I don't even think it's up for debate.
So I hope you found that beneficial. People seem to have dug the first two, and I was wrong. I definitely needed to update it. So here's your update, and we'll have another one soon. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.